Have you ever walked into a room and noticed someone suddenly become quiet? Have you ever introduced yourself to someone only to watch them become defensive, distant, or strangely cold? Have you ever been disliked by a person who barely knew you? What if I told you that sometimes people aren't reacting to who you are at all? They're reacting to what your existence makes them feel about themselves. And that's why some people become intimidated by you. The strange part is that intimidation rarely looks like fear. It often looks like criticism, avoidance, coldness, dismissiveness, passive-aggressive behavior. Sometimes it even looks like confidence. Most people assume that intimidation happens only when someone encounters a powerful person, a celebrity, a billionaire, a boss, someone physically imposing. But psychology tells a different story. People become intimidated whenever another person accidentally exposes a gap between who they are and who they wish they were. And that can happen almost anywhere, at work, in relationships, among friends, even inside families. Imagine two co-workers. One constantly complains about deadlines, procrastinates, and barely finishes assignments. The other quietly arrives on time, finishes tasks, and never talks about how hard they work. Most people expect admiration. Instead, resentment often appears. Not because the productive employee did something wrong, but because their behavior acts like a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable. Human beings constantly compare themselves to others. Psychologists call this social comparison. Your brain automatically evaluates where you stand relative to the people around you. You rarely notice it happening. Yet it influences emotions every day. A person who feels secure may look at someone successful and feel inspired. A person who feels insecure may look at the exact same individual and feel threatened. The difference isn't the successful person. The difference is the observer. Most people never realize this. Intimidation often begins long before words are exchanged. Research in social psychology shows that humans form impressions within seconds. Your brain rapidly analyzes posture, facial expressions, clothing, confidence, competence, and social status. These judgments occur so quickly that many people mistake them for intuition. Imagine meeting someone who speaks calmly, maintains eye contact, and seems comfortable in their own skin. Nothing about them is aggressive. Nothing about them is hostile. Yet some people instantly feel nervous. Why? Because confidence creates uncertainty in those who rely on external validation. Someone who constantly seeks approval enters social situations wondering whether they will be accepted. A confident person enters wondering whether the interaction is worthwhile. That difference changes the entire psychological dynamic. Suddenly, the approval seeker feels evaluated rather than evaluating, and that shift can feel threatening. What happens next surprises most people. Many intimidating individuals have no idea they're intimidating. In fact, some of the most intimidating people are surprisingly quiet. Popular culture teaches us that intimidation is loud. The reality is often the opposite. People who are secure don't need to dominate conversations. They don't rush to prove themselves. They don't constantly explain their value. Paradoxically, this creates mystery. And the human brain doesn't like mystery. When information is missing, the brain fills the gaps. This process is called inference. The problem is that people frequently fill those gaps with their own insecurities. If someone feels inadequate, they may assume a quiet person is judging them. If someone fears rejection, they may assume a reserved person dislikes them. If someone struggles with confidence, they may interpret neutrality as superiority. They're not seeing the other person. They're seeing their own fears reflected back at them. There's another layer to this. Intimidation is often connected to cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when reality conflicts with a person's beliefs about themselves. Suppose someone believes they are highly disciplined. Then they meet a person who exercises regularly, follows through on commitments, and consistently demonstrates self-control. Suddenly, their self-image becomes harder to maintain. The brain dislikes this tension. It wants relief. One option is self-improvement. The other option is reducing the value of the person creating the discomfort. This is why intimidating individuals sometimes become targets of criticism. They're called arrogant. They're labeled lucky. People search for flaws, not because flaws matter, because flaws reduce psychological discomfort. If the successful person can be dismissed, the uncomfortable comparison disappears. This is where psychology becomes fascinating. The brain often protects self-esteem by changing the story instead of changing behavior. That's why intimidation and projection frequently travel together. Projection occurs when people attribute their own emotions to someone else. A jealous person may accuse another person of being jealous. An insecure person may accuse another person of being arrogant. A judgmental person may assume everyone else is judging them. Notice how often this happens in everyday life. Someone enters a room and assumes everybody is looking at them. Someone receives neutral feedback and interprets it as an attack. Someone meets a highly competent colleague and instantly decides they're unfriendly. The interpretation feels real, but the interpretation often reveals more about the observer than the observed. Consider relationships. A partner who possesses strong boundaries can intimidate someone accustomed to controlling others. A person who communicates clearly can intimidate someone who relies on emotional games. A partner who is comfortable being alone can intimidate someone who depends entirely on external validation. The intimidation doesn't come from aggression, it comes from independence. Independence changes power dynamics, and changes in power dynamics often create anxiety. But here's where it gets dangerous. People who feel intimidated don't always withdraw. Sometimes they attack. Social psychologists have long observed that threats to self-esteem can trigger defensive behavior. Gossip, mockery, exclusion, passive aggression, undermining. Many people assume these behaviors come from strength. In reality, they often emerge from psychological discomfort. The person creating the hostility may not even understand why they're doing it. They simply know they feel uneasy. And the brain immediately searches for an explanation. Unfortunately, the explanation is often directed outward. This is why some workplaces become hostile toward high performers. It's why certain friend groups reject growth. It's why some family members react negatively when another family member becomes healthier, more confident, or more successful. The change challenges existing identities, and identity is one of the most protected structures in the human mind. Something even stranger happens. The more authentic a person becomes, the more intimidating they can appear. Authenticity removes predictable social signals. People who constantly adapt themselves to gain approval become easy to read. Authentic individuals don't always follow those patterns. They may disagree politely. They may set boundaries calmly. They may refuse requests without guilt. For secure people, this is refreshing. For insecure people, it can feel unsettling. Because authenticity cannot be controlled as easily as people-pleasing. Eventually, recognizing intimidation becomes easier. If someone barely knows you yet seems defensive around you, comparison may be occurring. If people frequently misinterpret your confidence as arrogance despite neutral behavior, insecurity may be involved. If your presence triggers unexplained resentment despite respectful interactions, hidden psychological processes may be operating beneath the surface. Of course, not all negative reactions are intimidation. Sometimes criticism is valid. Sometimes confidence genuinely becomes arrogance. The challenge is learning the difference. The key question is simple. Are people reacting to your behavior? Or are they reacting to what your behavior represents? That distinction changes everything. Because once you understand it, you stop taking every negative reaction personally. You realize that many social conflicts begin inside invisible psychological worlds. Worlds shaped by comparison, fear, projection, identity, and self-esteem. The next time someone seems intimidated by you, remember this. You may not be seeing fear. You may be witnessing an internal battle that started long before you arrived. A battle between the person someone is and the person they wish they could be. And sometimes your greatest influence on others isn't what you say. It's the uncomfortable possibility that your existence proves change is possible.